Welcome to part 3 of the first seminar on the origins of Christian beliefs. This is 2017 and we're in October 28. We are looking at the 12 articles of the Apostles' Creed, and as we continue on this last of the 3 sessions for today, we're going to look at how in the Apostles' Creed, the early church broke up the entire creed into 12 articles. Each article is supposedly contributed by one of the apostles, and look at number 7. We finish at number 7. And Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead. And the idea of judging the living and the dead, we mentioned, well, there were several theories of what they actually meant. The dead could be physically dead, the dead could be spiritually dead. And the judgment itself could be a real-time judgment, a judgment of something that happened only after Jesus died, meaning before Jesus' death in about 29 AD, the judgment hadn't yet occurred. Now, the third bit, or rather article number 8, I believe in the Holy Spirit. So that, no change there. The Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints. So here, they join the two together, that the church and the communion of saints are conjoined, meaning you can't have the church without a communion of saints. Meaning what? You're not supposed to go to a church by yourself. You're not supposed to have personal churches. And that was precisely what a lot of the royalty had, private chapels, right, in the palaces. Not just in England, but in much of Europe. The kings would have their private chapel, just them and God. And this was, in fact, against the idea of the Apostles' Creed. They're not supposed to have a personal chapel. They're supposed to have a communion with the others. The forgiveness of sins, that's article number 10. The resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. So let's do a quick discussion on the last 3 articles here. Forgiveness of sins, resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Any discussion on that?
Saints.
Yep.
Now, literally they mean holy ones, right?
Yeah.
Or anointed ones or something like that.
That's
so,
right.
Are we saints, or was it the saints that we know, like St. George, St. Michael, etc.?
Yeah, we are saints.
Okay.
Small s. The capital S are the specific guys who are special dispensation where they can have a connection to God. And of course, saints are also apparent in many other religions. They are humans who have achieved a certain status where they have the ear of the divine, of God, so to speak.
So they're almost...
There's a transference of merit when it comes to sainthood.
Because some churches, they pray to saints, like Catholics or Orthodox, right?
I kind of hesitate with the word pray. Well, there's a veneration, and there's and even the Catholic Church, the understanding of prayer together with rather than replacement of Jesus.
They pray for the intercedence of the saints.
That's right. You pray that the saints will pray for you. You don't pray to the saints itself.
But in the Orthodox Church, isn't there icons to saints?
Yeah.
And stuff
You don't
pray to.
You don't pray. No.
Pray to them.
You
ask them to pray for you to God. If you want something.
Because icons are, look at icons as portals. They are windows. They are windows into it.
Right.
So you see through it, which is why they're deliberately two-dimensional. They're not supposed to be realistic. They're not art in a classical sense of the word.
But do you ever pray to St. Michael, please protect my brother or sister?
Well, what he said.
You shouldn't. Yeah, some people do, but it's not.
It's more an appeal.
Yeah.
It's more an appeal. It's like calling a big brother. Can you help me with this? Except that guy's dead. Okay, so all you have the icons to help you out with.
Yeah.
And by the way,
the idea is that it's kind of the same idea. If you have a small group and you're asking people in the group to pray,
that's right,
for you for something, you're asking the saints to pray for you.
So they believe that the saints will hear you, and then they'll go on behalf of you to
and that's a hope.
Okay,
that's hope. I mean, we do the same thing all the time in our vernacular languages. Have a really good trip. What's that to do with anything? I mean, how can my saying that make your trip good? It doesn't, but you feel good that I say it, right? So one test is I said, Patricia, have a really crummy trip. I hope you're playing fascist. Nothing personal, but and you don't like me for saying that, right? It's something that about the human experience of expectation that plays a very major role. Okay, so forgiveness of sins. Does that mean that somehow? Because remember, this is not about the Spirit of Jesus. This is an article. It simply means you believe in the concept of forgiveness of sins. Why is the concept of forgiveness of sins important in the early church?
Concept of
Sin.
Forgiveness.
Yeah.
Why not?
Or put it that way around. Today, right now, today, as 21st century Christians, how many of you are anxious about forgiveness of sins?
Just a bit.
Okay, what are you anxious about? You wouldn't make.
Well, I mean, I know that I unfortunately do continue to sin, and I'm hoping that God will forgive those sins.
Why do you have to hope? Why not say you're going to do it? Sure.
Why do I have the hope?
Why do you have to hope? Just why not? Why not?
Why do I not just know it?
Yeah, just to say, hey, you know what?
God's forgiven me.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of sense that if I don't, I'm not taking what Jesus did, seriously.
Okay, so partly it's an emotional response as well.
Right.
Now, bear in mind the reason we're spending so much time in Apostles' Creed when it comes to do this, right? With all the science we have and the neuroscience and the paleoanthropology and all that stuff, these early creeds are the most important documents, and some people argue more important than the Bible itself, because they were constructed as a single document in a way the Bible was not. The Bible, there's a lot of conflicts, internal conflicts, and people have different opinions, but the Creed is a single document. It's a very ancient document, and in many ways more ancient than the New Testament we have. I mean, think about that. So I take it very, very seriously. It's a very important document. You may not agree with everything it says. It never claimed to be of divine status. It's a summary, but it's a portal, it's a window to how the earliest Christians thought about God and themselves. And you notice one thing here, no mention of the Bible in the Apostles' Creed. None whatsoever. Not even Old Testament. You could argue, well, the New Testament wasn't finalized. Fine. No mention of the Scriptures. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. And yet it's a single biggest thing for us today as modern 21st century Christians. Mm-hmm. We think of the Bible as the authority for everything. We just quote the Bible verse and then bingo, it's supposed to stop all the conversations. Not for them. Yeah, isn't it?
Very interesting.
Not for them at all. And they already had the Old Testament scriptures for hundreds of years. It wasn't that they didn't have the Old Testament. It was not an issue. So why is that? Why does the Apostles' Creed not mention the single most important thing in modern Christian church today?
Wasn't invented yet.
No, the Old Testament. Old Testament was around for a long time. I mean, Jesus read the scriptures.
Right.
Paul told Timothy about how important the scriptures were.
They call the Apostles' Creed. I mean, I guess they're thinking the most important. Jesus passed this on to the apostles, and the apostles are Jesus.
But it didn't say. It didn't say believe in the apostles. There's another one they don't believe.
How old is the Apostles' Creed?
As old as the 2nd century AD, but the one we have is 1988. I know, yeah, I know. There have been many revisions, but nonetheless, the structure of it.
Because most people can read the Bible.
That's not even the point, because Jesus was older than this, and he read from the scriptures.
It wasn't canonized.
But
doesn't matter.
But
the Jews never canonized.
I mean, the belief was that Jesus passed on these.
To the apostles, something else in John chapter 13 verse 34, and we'll come to that in just a few slides.
You say that the scriptures have life, but I give life?
Jesus said, a new commandment I give unto you. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine a new commandment? What in the world are you doing, Jesus? We've had this for so long. We've got Abraham, we've got Moses. You telling me that all these guys forgot something that you just thought of? That's precisely what he said. A new commandment I give unto you, you shall love one another. Even as I loved you, you shall love one another.
So are you saying he nullified the
think
Old Testament?
Think about it. You would have thought a serious extension of Christianity, of Judaism, would mention, and I believe in Abraham, in Moses, in Joseph, in all the patriarchs. These are important people. In King David, in Jeremiah. Complete ignorance of it. The creeds were the precursors to developing a distinct religion from Judaism. And you can see why it's distinct, because this creed began to introduce the seed of what the later creed called the Nicene Creed will make it strong, the Trinity. Over here is belief. But remember, when you say belief in Jesus, remember, these are not 3 articles. These are basically 8 things to believe in. Believing in Jesus was the same status as believing in the forgiveness of sins, resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Same status, not above. Later on, after the controversies, they added something else. Jesus is divine of the same substance, homoousios, as God. Because before that, when you say, I believe in Jesus, may not be the same substance. In fact, if you read this creed, it's clearly not the same substance because it is issued by the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary. It is not the same substance as God like that because God wasn't issued by anybody. Do you see the problem? You can see the evolution of what eventually became the Trinitarian formula. At this point, it wasn't yet a Trinitarian formula.
Okay. Now, you're saying that the Apostles' Creed makes it distinct from Judaism at this time?
Begin to make it.
Yeah. But I thought it happened like 70 AD.
No, it didn't. It didn't.
After the fall of Jerusalem.
Clearly not, because all the apostles understood themselves as good Jews.
Right.
They didn't think of themselves as a new religion. There was no conversion. In fact, you look at the Gospels, you'd be hard-pressed to find any place where there's a conversion. And Jesus never asked people to convert from one religion to the other. Never did that. What was stunningly interesting about Jesus, the way he was portrayed by the Gospel writers, he never asked for what we now call evangelism. He never said, oh, convert the Jews, convert the Muslims, the Buddhists, convert the Hindus, the Zoroastrians, they were all over the place. He never said that.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Preach the gospel.
And do what?
Preach the gospel.
And then what? Make disciples?
Make disciples.
No conversion.
But what does that say? Does that imply?
Because that's how we understand it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have looked at the word discipleship as a post-conversion development.
Right.
Jesus didn't.
You have to convert first.
Yeah. Jesus didn't have that.
Well, still, it's followers as far as following his
That
commands.
means you can be a
Right.
Hindu and follow Jesus.
Right.
And the Hindus see it like that. They can't understand why you have a big problem because Jesus never asked me to convert. Right? You can have a Buddhist because Buddhism is a philosophy. Hinduism is a philosophy. They didn't have creator gods the way we did until much later. They developed the idea of Shiva and Brahman and Vishnu.
Well, even, I'm reading this book now by a Creeder, is his name, about the early church, and it's actually saying, the early church did not go out and evangelize.
No,
they
didn't.
actually were very secret in their meetings.
Absolutely.
And it was only through, people found out
Yeah,
about what they
yeah.
were doing that they would come in, and it
Yeah.
took time to actually...
In fact, it wasn't that they were against the idea of evangelism. It was that they found it puzzling. Why in the world we want to join my religion? Because my religion is my people, right? It doesn't make sense. He said, you got your own. You got the Greeks, you got the Romans, you got the Persians. You have your own. Why do you want to take mine for? Nothing to do with you.
Well, I think it was more from partly because they were afraid of persecution, but partly also they didn't want to have people who didn't really understand and had their
Right.
worldview changed who might contaminate.
And a lot of people didn't understand what Jesus actually meant, or at least a portrayal of Jesus according to Matthew. To go Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the world. I mean, that's a big jump from Samaria to the ends of the world. I mean, it's a huge jump.
Yeah.
Right? Did Jesus actually mean to go to Papua New Guinea and tell the people to have a church? Did he actually mean to go to, Central America and tell the Mayans and the Aztecs to become Christians?
Well, Mormons believe that. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can see all these ramifications come out into play when you look at this. And forgiveness of sins is such a universal thing. It assumes that everyone has sins. But even here, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that all are sinful, and this is Paul, right? Romans 3:23. But the creeds are very to the point. It has 8 things to believe in. So for today, I just want you to understand as we begin to look at the Apostles' Creed, we look at it all the way to December 9th, right? You can see the evolution and changes. The Apostles' Creed is not about the Trinity. The Apostles' Creed is about believing in 8 things. 8 things to believe in order to be a Christian. And this was a development from the one thing that you believe in order to be a Christian, according to Romans and 1 Corinthians and Galatians. You have it in your notes. In those days, in the New Testament, there's only one thing to believe in. Jesus is Lord. That's all you believe in. And then the question was, so what does that mean? And that's when all this came out. So, for example, here in the 12 articles, that Jesus is Lord, which is a second article, it became 12 articles in order to support the second article. If Jesus is Lord, you have to say Jesus is Lord because he had the authority from God the Creator, right? So the first article gave the foundation for the second article, which is belief in God, Jesus, not just as a nice guy, as Lord. So people keep asking me this, when you do historical studies of Jesus, are you tempted to think Jesus is just another ordinary guy? Yes, you're tempted, but you shouldn't be. Because if Jesus was an ordinary guy, it just doesn't cut it. There are a lot of ordinary guys. There's something different about Jesus. Now, whether that something was meant to be the same substance of God was a later development. At the time, they didn't think so. But they thought he was special because, now we say why. The third article now tells you why he's special. Born of the Virgin Mary, power of the Holy Spirit. These are symbols to tell you, when they say Virgin Mother, in every case of the ancient Near East, it's a symbol of a special discourse. Now, what about the fourth article? Crucified, died, and was buried. They needed to say that because why? Jesus wasn't around. If he wasn't around, no longer alive, you got to explain why he died. And if he died, but you can't find the body, you got to explain why, because of resurrection, right? And buried. On the third day, descended to the dead, ascended to heaven. And then number 7 is a hope bit. He will come to judge the living and the dead. And then from number 8 onwards, number 8 itself, number 8 exists because they already said in the second and the third article that he was conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit. Now you got to say you believe in the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Notice one thing. Although he was conceived by the Holy Spirit and born of Mary, the belief is of Holy Spirit, but there's no belief in Mary. Kind of curious, right? Why would you believe in the male component, well, not the male, but the other component and not the female component? Because at the time, Immaculate Conception wasn't developed yet. Mary was still a human with sin. There was no concept about why there was a sinless Mary. And in the last 3 articles, forgiveness of sin. Well, you want to have it because if Jesus doesn't forgive sin, what's the point of being Jesus to die on the cross, if not to forgive sin? Number 11, resurrection of the body. Now, the resurrection of the body is our resurrection, we humans individually. So as to say, if Jesus wasn't around, we won't have the resurrection of our body. Our body will not be resurrected. And then the life everlasting. So all these 12 articles, 11 of them are to support a single article, article number 2, that Jesus is Lord. And then the question for the church is that if we now establish Jesus as Lord, how do we obey Jesus? What's different that Jesus brought in that was not already there in the Jewish world? And that's where we come to John 13:34, right? The new commandment. So let's look at the next slide. The earliest Christian creeds, Jesus is Lord. That's it. That's all it is. If you can say Jesus is Lord, bingo, you're in. By the time the creeds came out, now you got 12 things to remember, right? 12 articles of 8 things to believe in. And today, so you're going to decide for yourself, by the way. One homework you can put for yourself is today, if someone, a non-believer or even a believer, approaches you at church and say, Bill, what are the non-negotiables? What must I, if you were to write your own creed, what must I believe in order to be considered a follower of Jesus? It'd be very interesting. And then ask yourself, how many of these do you actually obey? And not only that, have you obeyed the 12 articles in the early creed? And if not, why? Yes.
Well, what does that actually mean, Jesus is Lord? Does it mean, do you have to believe that Jesus is God?
No, not yet. It simply means that Jesus is worthy of emulating. You want to follow Jesus. Because the word Lord, Adonai, it's from the word to adore. You know, where we get the word you adore. Who else do you adore? You adore your father, your mother, your loved ones.
But isn't it something more than that when say seated at the right hand of the Father?
Remember that's different. He's asking just here.
Okay.
Just on New Testament text alone, it's just Jesus is Lord. Right? No explanation in any great detail. So the creeds were trying to explain what the Bible itself didn't explain.
So it's not even worship yet. It's just emulate.
Emulating because
you admire him.
As far as we know, in the Bible text itself, the New Testament, there is no occasion where Jesus was worshipped. Not one. Very interesting too. They ate with him, they talked to him, they argued with him, they listened to him, but there was no worship of Jesus with an altar. No, it's not worship. He acknowledged his Lord. He did exactly what Jesus said he should do, right? And by the way, that is after Jesus had died and resurrected. In his lifetime, there was no worship of Jesus as such, because Jesus was a friend to them.
when Jesus healed the demoniac, he came to his feet and bowed down to him.
Yeah.
He wanted to follow him, and
Yeah.
Jesus said, "No, just go to the
That's right.
go to the temple and tell him what God has done."
What did
for you."
Jesus do? Jesus reject that worship. I'm talking about his people, not.
Well, he didn't reject
yeah.
the worship. He didn't.
Yeah.
He told him not to be not
That's
to
right.
follow him,
So-
but he told him. To,
so
but, he,
it's-
but he says, "Go and tell him what God has
So
done
it's
for you."
very
Right,
curious.
right.
The idea of worshiping of Jesus has to be a post-mortem experience.
Right. I was about to
Not
say
when
that.
he's alive. When he was alive, his goal was, whether he wanted it, we don't know, but the apostles never saw him as someone to worship. In fact, they emulated him, and one of the strongest emulation is when he said, "This is how you pray." And then he gave what we now call the Lord's Prayer. Right? He went through the motions of prayer. And then you find, even before he taught it, in his own anguish, the prayer at the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? It's a prayer.
So, I mean, there are hints. Okay, it's
Yeah.
not.
I know.
Even when Peter at one point says, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man." I mean, again,
Right,
it's
right.
somehow he's elevating him
Right.
above.
Yeah, if you think that's worship, then your worship has a different connotation. Worship normally involves altars. The God is not here. The God is Jupiter, all this other worship. The gods are out there. And the gods are not human, by the way. They're not going to walk
Right,
around with
right.
you and talk with you and have lunch with you. They're not going to do that. Gods just don't do that.
But I think Bart Ehrman was saying, getting into the Greco-Roman world, saying that it was common for people to divinize great people.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it was just a common thing.
It became more and more common
Right.
after the Persian period.
Right. So it wasn't a unique thing.
No, it's not unique.
Right.
But let's stick to this, right? Now, second one, receive Jesus Christ as Lord. That became a later one in Colossians 2:6. Again, what does it mean to receive Jesus as Lord? It's to not worship the emperor. So the goal was never what is Jesus. The goal is what is not Jesus. Jesus is not the emperor. Don't do that to the emperor. Okay? Then comes this stunning thing. Mandatum novus dono vobis. A new commandment I give you. Sometimes we say, I give unto you, but the correct translation is, a new commandment I give you. I love one another as I've loved you, so you must love one another. Oh, the typos are terrible. Mandatum novum, new mandate, okay? A new mandate do I give you. So this development of the new mandate became very crucial for the early Christians because, can you imagine, you are a part of Jewish religion that evolved from, well, at least 1000 BC. Although there were many changes along the way and they shifted the goalposts here and there, the gist of it is still pretty much a Mosaic understanding coming out of the Exodus. For the Jews to accept that here's one guy, not overly educated particularly, coming from a town called Nazareth, and he tells you, I give you a new command, that's playing God right there. So if there's anything that could even hint at a divine status, it would be this one. John 13:34. Not anything else. Everything else, when they told Philip, if you see me, see the Father, these are all symbols of saying, I've got God on my back. But now this is a different ballgame. He didn't say, a new commandment I pass to you, which the Father God told me last night, I'm going to pen it onto you, right? He didn't say that. This statement is so striking. And not surprisingly, given by whom? Written by John, of all people, right? Why is John such an important person to give this sort of thing? Because John was the one who made it very clear in John 1:1 that Jesus is the Logos, is the Word. The very first words of John, Gospel of John, replaces the very first words of Genesis 1:1, where in Hebrew, Bereshit, in the beginning, God says, beginning as well, in the beginning, same words, but now he introduced something that Genesis does not have. The idea of the Logos. And how was the Logos? In a way, he went beyond the creeds that came later than that. It's not just a guy that came out from the Holy Spirit. The Logos is eternal. It's been around a long time. How long? Well, long is the wrong word to use because you can't measure it. It's been around forever. So John became very instrumental, very important, and you can imagine at a certain level contradicting Matthew, that focuses on the human birth and trying to make it special by focusing on another kind of birth about virgins and all that, right? John went past all of that. Why did John do that in the first words? I think John, whoever wrote the Gospel according to John, because Gospels are all anonymous, whoever wrote it must have such a sophisticated Greek mind and a philosophical mind. He must have known the moment you play the game of virgin birth, you're going to have an ad infinitum nightmare of how many immaculates you're going to have before you go back to the very beginning, because birth is a baby coming out of a person, along with all the entrails, along with the placenta, along with everything else. It is so connected to the mother at the biological end. It's very hard to have one and have no connection to the other. But when Jesus is Logos, it's a very clean thing. So clean that you have no controversies whatsoever.
But he still emphasized the humanity of Jesus, though.
Oh yeah,
Still,
yeah.
for-
No choice, because
yeah.
Jesus was a human.
Right.
He was trying to make sure that when Jesus gave a new commandment, he was authorized to do that, because no one authorized him. He was the authority to do that. Okay, so memorize this verse, simple verse, but it says, "A new command I give to you: love one another." Then to put a punctuation, full stop. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. So your love for one another is not a romantic love, or it's the kind of love that I have for you, and I have modeled it. Which means what? Now you got to go back and say, okay, let's see, how did Jesus model that love? Because that's the quality of love he's talking about, agape. It's not the conditional love of I love you because you're my DNA, because you live in my town, you're my tribe. None of that kicks in. And then if you look at Jesus' life, the way he was portrayed by the gospel writers, it puts things in a topsy-turvy spin, because Jesus' love for people completely transcended tribe. He went to the Samaritans. This is the last person they're supposed to go to. So think about it, right? She went to the woman at the well, went to the Samaritan, went to Lazarus, went to all the wrong people, Zacchaeus, Levi, and all these characters.
To Lebanon.
Yeah, sorry?
He went up to Lebanon.
Yeah, Cana is in Lebanon, yeah.
Tyre and Sidon.
Tyre and Sidon, yeah. I'm
Syrophoenician
hoping
woman.
to go there in January.
The Syrophoenician woman.
Yeah, Phoenician.
Right.
And then after all that he did, you want to follow him? Can you imagine what a nightmare it was for the Jewish authorities? Any Jewish person who followed Jesus completely upended all the things that nationalism had developed in the Jewish world to make sure you don't follow the Phoenicians. And now Jesus did just that.
But the other thing about him being God, though, too, I mean, he did claim that he could forgive sins. So that
Yeah.
certainly
That
is
only
why-
only divines can do that.
Right.
Yeah. So it's very cryptic. It's very cryptic. I look at what Jesus did, and you gotta love him for this. I mean, this guy was fearless, absolutely fearless. When you think about it, he was the anti-hero, the real, the Blade Runner, if you must, the guy who broke all the rules. And then he says, "I give you this new mandate." Okay, how much time have we got left? Yeah.
20 minutes.
Okay, good. So let's, before we move any further, any questions on this new mandate, the Mandatum Novum? It's a very crucial point as a departure, as a movement of Christianity out of Judaism. Because Judaism cannot tolerate a spiritual leader that goes up to the Phoenicians. Not going to happen. Too much blood has been spilled for too long.
So when he's saying a new commandment I give to you, is he almost saying, well, the Ten Commandments, all that? Is
Yeah.
This supersedes everything.
And the church kind of accepted that.
Right.
And that's why we don't do the Ten Commandments. And that's why we still eat pork. And that's why we're shellfish and lobster bisque and all this sort of good stuff. It's there. Okay, let's move on. Yeah.
in the old, I mean, when Jesus gave, they asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? He said, love Lord thy God with all heart, soul, strength, and mind. The second is like it, love thy neighbor as thyself. Both of those are from the Torah, but they're in separate.
The first one is from the Torah for sure.
I think
Okay.
the second one is also. I thought one was from Deuteronomy. the other was from
Love your
Leviticus.
neighbor. I don't know about that, because Jesus' definition of neighbor is
Well,
It's
very
different.
Right,
I mean, that's what I said. It's
exactly,
different.
Yeah.
The Jews believed it. Right.
Yeah.
Neighbor is only for Jews only.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, back then,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, when Jesus says love your neighbor, he was serious.
Everyone.
That's when you have the.
Yeah.
That's why
In
you
fact,
have
when
the
we come
parable
to the
of
last,
Good Samaritan.
when we come to the last doctrine in 2021, if you guys are still around and I'm still alive, we're going to look at ufology, all right? To look at what about UFOs? What about all these other? is that part of the neighbor that you talk about. Because bear in mind, with every discovery and technology we have, our experience of neighbor dramatically increases. In Jesus' time, you'd be lucky if you know your village. You're just working like a dog, right? Roads are not built. When you think about Japan, up to the Meiji period, the 17th, 18th centuries, past Meiji period, no roads were made between towns. You're not supposed to travel outside your city. Only samurais can travel from town to town. And how do you know it's a samurai? He carries two swords, a katana and a shorter sword. Why? They were the emissaries of the emperor, the shogun. If you are caught and you're not a samurai and you travel on the road from town to town, you will be immediately executed, no questions asked. So the idea of isolation, geographical isolation, is very crucial. And that's why I talk about geohistory. You go to Papua New Guinea, 700 distinct languages, because it's so mountainous, you can't build roads easily, right? So in my travels, I began to appreciate what is it like, number one, to be in isolation, number two, to be nomadic. So for example, in June, when I was in Mongolia, in the steppes of Mongolia, way up in the north, no towns to speak of, no hotels. You drive your 4x4, no roads, by the way. The roads are path that was taken this season when the rains come and the waters form, and you go by that path. And next year, that path is wiped out when the rivers come again. And then you just avoid rivers. That's what a road is. A road is avoiding river. And I still remember Ling was trying to contact me because I normally give her a list of every place I'm staying in hotel, but Mongolia I can't give. And she said, why not? I said, I don't know where I'm going to be from day to day. It's not so simple that I'm going to be in that town, staying in that hotel, and here's the address and here's the phone number. None of that. The 3 weeks I was there, I began to really appreciate what it was like to be a Canaanite nomad. The isolation was so stark. For a 21st century guy, I felt intense loneliness, but those guys didn't. In fact, they're glad not to see someone. To see someone runs the risk of being killed. It's always like that. You see someone far away, you send a scout and say, what do you want? And you see that happening when Abraham went towards Pharaoh, right? They sent an emissary way into the desert. Who are you and what do you want? Friend or foe, basically. We have a whole different world today. We're trying to meet up friends constantly. We have meet-up groups and say, can we meet for lunch and all that? In those days, meeting someone was a risk of dying. In any case, once you understand that context, all the languages that the vocabularies you use come into play. You can see what a neighbor is. A neighbor to us is normally someone who can water our plants and take care of our cats and dogs. For many places, a neighbor is a danger. A neighbor is where a boundary stops. If you study, for example, Scottish history, the Highlands of Scotland among the clans, why there's so many feuds in Scotland among the clans? Land is sparse, food is hard to get by, weather is harsh. Your neighbors are your biggest dangers, always. So what do you want to do? You have as many sons as possible, because your sons will protect you, right? And the sons know their job, your job. And once they can protect, and this is a human condition, you protect your boundary, then you peer next door and you say, oh, they only have 4 sons, I got 8 sons. Then you're tempted now to raid them, to attack them. Strong always wins. So in this context, you'll see it reflected throughout the Old Testament, where they jostle for, remember Lot and Abraham jostling for water, wells and all that? Esau and Jacob, all same thing. They're all jostling. And eventually, the winner will always say, God's on my side, right? Ex post facto. After the fact, they'll say God's on your side. But you can see the idea of neighborhood is so different from our understanding of neighborhood. Because we have something they didn't have. We have rule of law. It just didn't happen for them. At this point, you can see the importance of the Greek period coming in for New Testament times. When the Greeks brought in, from the 8th century on with Solon, earlier people like that, they went all the way to the development of Athenian democracy and the idea that the metropolis, right? Metropolis means mother city, meta. So the metropolis idea of the big town where everyone revolves around it, and there's a rule of law. It makes a huge difference in the way we think about it. So when we read the Old Testament and New Testament, and we're tempted to judge the people on terrible ethics, they kill each other and all that, remember, they did not have a police force. And by the way, just as an aside, do you know when the first police force came into place in the world? Yeah.
1800s.
Who was that?
England,
Britain.
wasn't
Sir Robert Peel. That's why they call them bobbies, named after Robert. So only in the 19th century did we have a police system, which is not a military, but a police system, right? It's very interesting. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Baptism and declaration of the creed. So in the early church, baptism was the most important mark of identification with Jesus and the church. It was followed by a public recitation of the Apostles' Creed, which means, of course, this is for the elites, right? Most people can't read and write. So we're talking about the elites here. If among the elites you want to identify with Jesus, you do it in baptism, public baptism, and then a public declaration. And by the way, the public declaration is rarely inside like a nice confined church with doors. When they say public, they mean public. I mean, people know. They know
Why
that
do you say it's the elites, though?
because most people don't have the time and energy to undergo a baptism. Baptism is very expensive stuff. You need water, you need a prescribed location, you need to have time to do it, space to do it, you need witnesses, you need all the sort of implements of what it means to undergo a baptism in the first century, second and third centuries. Many people couldn't leave the towns. Many couldn't, when they say work, they mean the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. That's majority of the workers. It's not, can I have 2 hours off to get baptized? Not going to happen. Okay?
But, of the early believers, from what I've always read, the majority actually were poor people.
Oh yeah, majority poor. So when we say this baptism stuff, don't get the impression that every Christian was baptized. In fact, I can tell you something else. Someone as important as St. Augustine. When was he baptized? Anyone remember?
Very late.
Very late in life.
Yeah.
Very late in life.
In his 30s.
When was Constantine baptized?
No, his deathbed.
Deathbed. Yeah, because baptism, you prepare like crazy for it. You got to really know what you're doing. It's not something, I'll just go to church and then hallelujah, kumbaya, and we're good to go. Right now,
Sprinkle the water.
yeah, sprinkle some water, none of this stuff. Which is why when I first, as an elder, when I saw baptism going, I was a bit disheartened because it was so casual.
Right.
Then everybody stand up and said, yeah, I'll take care of you. And you don't even know the guy.
No, some of my friends have multiple baptisms.
Oh, yeah.
When they feel like it.
It really disheartened me a great deal because I regard the sacraments as sacred. They're pretty important stuff. So when people say, Ron, are you against sacraments? No, I'm not. I'm against the abuse of sacraments and marginalizing, making it another entertainment forum. But let's move further. To bear witness to Jesus' lordship was to be a martyr. Same word. The word martyr came from the word witness. Very interesting. Today we think of martyr as going to die, right? Well, in those days, there were 2 categories of how you suffered for the Lord, interestingly enough. If you were lucky, you were a martyr. It means you die. If you're unlucky, you suffer for a long time. It's called a confessor. So we have Maximus the confessor. Yeah, Greek guy, right? What does that mean? He got his hands chopped off, he got his eyes taken out, all kinds of, oh my goodness. When they say he's a confessor, it doesn't mean he confessed under torture. It means he confessed Christ no matter how many limbs they remove from his body. That is pretty serious stuff. And if you see the torture implements, you kind of want to know. They put hot rods up places you don't want to put up and all kinds of stuff too. Sometimes they pour lead down your throat. Not to kill you, to make your life such a misery. And they are permanent miseries. They're not short-term miseries. They're not like pulling your nails out, you'll grow back again. But so being a witness to Jesus' lordship was very serious stuff. You don't send your kids to be a witness to the lordship of Christ, okay? You don't do infant baptism the way we understand it like that. Baptism was serious commitment. Your life could end tomorrow. You want to do that? That's what it means. So that those who were baptized were considered in incredibly high regard. They were brave. They were not just saying, I'm going to sign the dotted line, right? They're going to say, when I make that decision, from now on, everything I hold dear in my life and my possessions and my loved ones, they're all up for grabs. And they could die tomorrow. And that's what happened.
But there was still this prevalent belief that Jesus was going to come back soon. Right?
I don't know how prevalent it was because we don't have that many writings, but we know there were disappointments.
Right.
Because in the New Testament, the writer said soon,
Right.
and 300 years later, this is 390.
Right.
That's Not that soon. And they got to develop doctrines. We'll come across that later to look at time. Okay, and then they start talking about to the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years. So maybe 5 days. That's 5,000 years. I'll buy you some time, right? Okay. A public declaration of Jesus' lordship may lead to punishment or death. In 381, the doctrine of the Trinity became a legal matter, and henceforth, baptism included confession of God, Jesus, and the Spirit to wipe out every sin of a previous life. You have two lives. Baptism is to kill the old life and to be born again in a new life. So this two-life motif was very important. The reason why what I'm telling you right now kind of seems a bit strange is because we have lost that concept. We pay lip service to say, oh, the old man, the new man. We don't really live like this. We don't really. Baptism, conversion, at the end of the day, it doesn't change that much. It simply means on Sundays you can't play golf anymore, but not a whole lot more than that. And you've got to ask yourself some very serious questions when you do a course like this, right? What's the whole aim of this course? Part of it is to call us to account. If after today you still want to consider yourself a Christian, what is the price you're willing to pay? Because these early people paid pretty heavy prices. Why don't we have a price to pay? How did the development of the institutional church sanitize Christianity to the point where we are almost indistinguishable from our workmates who are not Christians? Indistinguishable. And we try to paper it down a bit. By the way, I brought this copy to show you guys who are thinking of getting a copy. Remember I mentioned two books that you might want to get. This is Charles Freeman's book, 8381. Have you read this before?
I ordered it.
You ordered it? Okay. It's. I'm going to give you a warning. This is not a polite book. Okay. This, like a lot of Englishmen, he grew up in the church and was a Christian and was eventually quite disappointed when he did some research. And he's a very well-regarded independent scholar. You know, there are many independent scholars. Some are not very good, but he's very well regarded. I forget the publisher. Is this Oxford? On the spine.
Overlook.
Overlook. Okay. So, if you read what I underlined in red, Patricia, what did you read it?
Just underlying red?
Yeah.
Which part?
All of them. Just read the sentence.
Define Christian orthodoxy. Free thought was unambiguously suppressed. The Christian Church reached a consensus on the Trinity at the Council of Constantinople in 381. Why has Theodosius' revolution been airbrushed from the historical record?
Yeah, airbrush is a very strong word.
In the groundbreaking new book, acclaimed historian Charles Freeman shows that the Council of Constantinople was in fact a sham, only taking place after Theodosius' decree had already become law.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
The church was acquiescing to the to the overwhelming power of the emperor, and the council was a cover-up. Still, the problem ran even deeper. Freeman argues that Theodosius' edict and the subsequent suppression of paganism not only brought an end to the diversity of religious and philosophical beliefs throughout the empire, but created numerous theological problems for the church, problems which remain unsolved to this day. The year 381 AD, as Freeman puts it, was a turning point in which time forgot.
Okay, so this is such a stunning development, and when I was at seminary, 381 was the year we kind of want to avoid because it's so dense what happened, and so many things were uncertain. And when this book first came out, by the way, you know me, I'm a cheapo. If I buy a hardcover book, it means I can't wait for it to go softcover. This was before ebooks came out, right? You want to get it now. And when I first read it, it shocked me to the core because I was reading about Theodosius and the changes and all that. What he's basically saying is in 381, this council, when he says it was a sham, and he didn't mince any words, right? Basically saying the emperor already decided what's going to happen. The council was to rubber stamp it,
right?
Okay, and he's not the first person to say that, but
Is he a Christian or no?
He regards himself as a follower of Christ, but he doesn't buy. He doesn't buy some of the because he's from England, so he sees a lot of bad things happening. I think if you go through, if you're a Christian in England and you understand what happened with Henry VIII and all that, it's so disgusting. It's really, really hard to take seriously the Church of England after that. And some of you have read my latest post on Facebook where I talk about Justin Welby, the current Archbishop, and the cover-up.
Right, yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, Rowan Williams, the previous highly regarded Archbishop, was also around when all these things happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Rowan Williams.
Well, you can read. Yeah, and I read it on the way from China to Mongolia, the New York Times or something, and I couldn't believe it. So you saw what happened was I took my iPhone, I kind of photographed certain parts of the newspaper and put it together as a series of photographs. You can read it. Now, okay, so in 381, the doctrine of Trinity became a legal matter. It was no longer just a theological matter. You have to believe if you're a Roman citizen. No ifs and buts.
Because I remember reading McCulloch, he talks about theology. I was shocked
Yeah.
too when I first read about
Pretty
it.
nasty guy.
No, I was shocked. But after this edict, like mobs of Christians and monks would go out, ramble, get pagans, and kill them.
Yeah. Slaughter
Yeah.
them.
Became an official of the Roman Empire?
Oh yeah. It's an edict. It's a law. It's not a
Royal
theological thing. The theological thing was to kind of mask the fact that it's a legal decision, a political decision that was masked as a theological decision that God wanted it this way.
Right.
So you can see now, because 381 is such an important date, it also tarnished everything else that happened in 381. Now I'm going to tell you this, councils are not short-term things. They are very major things. In fact, if you try to read on internet what 381, what they did, there were so many decisions. It takes you years to go through because this was not one or two people coming together, right? Years of planning. The sad thing about what Theodosius did and the way the council papered over it, it put so many other things into disrepute. And some other things are good stuff. I got to say this, on that when you read about what happened in councils, don't think it's a simple matter that if there's a scandal here, that everything is bad. It's not the case. The scandals are scandals, and our task is to be very fair to it and say, some of the bad stuff, accept it. Yes, it's bad stuff, call it. And then there are other stuff which are good stuff, and accept the fact that a lot of good things happen in these councils as well. So, by the way, someone asked me, would you mention what the end game is as far as the creed is concerned for me personally, right? Am I against the creed or for the creed? On the whole, I think we need a kind of creed, because without a kind of creed, it's too loosey-goosey. Anyone can invent a Christianity of their own making. We're back to the problem, right? But what I am questioning is the current creeds we have. There's so many now after the 16th century that we should come clean and say, let's reduce all of it to a single creed. And if the church can't agree on one creed, how is the non-Christian world supposed to take it seriously? For goodness sake. Why do the Second Helvetic and the Westminster Confession and all kinds of funny creeds? Look at it all, make a decision, stick to one, and make it as short as possible. Creeds should not be a burden. But if someone would say, because when I'm preparing this, some of my friends said, you're clearly going to criticize the creed. I said, yes. Then why spend so much time studying it line by line? Because on the whole, the concept of a creedent Christianity is a good thing. The development was tarnished, okay? And we're going to close here. So I'm going to close with evolution of baptism and the creed. How much of this 4th century Christian belief is retained today? Baptism is necessary, public declaration of Jesus' Lordship necessary, declaration of belief in the Trinity, prepared to die for such a declaration, a confession causally removes sins of the old person. How much of this do you, as a person today, take it as, this is what I believe, right? It's a personal question you can ask. And there are 2 more slides, and you'll see how to be a Christian in the 1st century, declare that Jesus is Lord, in contradistinction to the Roman emperor, because any religious statement is also a political statement. If you can say Jesus is Lord in the 1st century, you're in, bingo. But the 4th century got harder, right? By the 4th century, baptized by water, profess the creed, affirm the Trinity, study the creed for instruction. Now it becomes pretty elitist. Not many can afford to study, but it became the case. So this study the creed thing is like study the Bible, right? We've got to make a decision as a Christian world. Are we requiring Bible study as a mark of being a Christian? If it is, you better make sure people have access to it. A lot of people don't have access to a lot of stuff. So be careful about something that's a recommended and something that's a requirement. I think there should be very few requirements, but a lot of recommendations, because we keep, evolving and changing. I'm going to close with something we'll start with next time, which is the Nicene and the Athanasian Creed. So in the 5th century, there were controversies within the church that led to the creation of 2 longer creeds than the Apostles' Creed. One of them, during the Arian controversy, the council met at Chalcedon and affirmed the Nicene Creed of 325. There are 2 Nicene Creeds, 325 and we'll see later on. That's a chart, I put them side by side, which began, "We believe in one God." It affirmed the divinity of Jesus, which shared the same substance as the Father.
So the Nicene Creed of 325 then
when it first came out, it was recommended, it wasn't endorsed. So people think the moment it came out, everyone followed it.
Okay, so that was still after what we believe was the first time the Apostles' Creed came out.
Except
but before it became official.
That's right. Except the first creed, we don't know what it looks like. We don't have it.
Right.
What we have are the latest creeds, right? And in the AD 500s, another creed came out called the Pseudo-Athanasian Creed. Pseudo because Athanasius has long died by 500s. So we call it a fake pseudo, but they want to use the word Athanasian in the same way that we use the word apostle when the apostles had died already a long time ago. So they call it the Athanasian Creed, or sometimes it's called the creed in Latin, Kim Kake Vult, meaning whoever wishes to be saved. Because it starts this way: whoever wishes to be saved will have to accept what I'm going to say next. If you don't, curse upon you and all this sort of stuff, right? It explicitly stated the equality of the 3 persons of the Trinity, condemns anyone who disagrees with it. So, while the Nicene Creed and Apostles' Creed mention the divinity of Jesus, only the Athanasian Creed mentioned the equality of Jesus with God the Father. See the difference? You can be divine and yet not be equal. Just like you can be human and not be equal. So equality is a very big deal. So when someone says, which creed do we have that talks about the Trinity? Well, let me ask you this. If you take the 21st century understanding of the Trinity, which is that Jesus is divine and equal to God the Father, then it's not the Apostles' Creed, it's not even the Nicene Creed. It is the Athanasian Creed.
So which is the one that talks about where the Holy Spirit proceedeth from? Because that was a big controversy.
Yeah, these are
So that came later?
No, that came around the same period.
Same period.
Yeah, but the Athanasian Creed was to fix it, because it's a 6th century creed. It's later than all the others.
Right? Because the Orthodox and
They
Catholics
didn't really fix it. No, They didn't really fix it. Yeah. So listen, thanks for listening to this, and we are going to close for this session. I hope you're excited about learning the complexities just on the Apostles' Creed alone. And when we meet the next time round, I think for us it's next week, we're going to go launch right into the Nicene and Athanasian Creed. So what I suggest is, before we meet, if you could go through again the video, just quickly go through it and see what we have done. You can follow it easily, okay? Okay.